final story is one that, now this is from Punditry, an Irish outlet, said like a shameful, embarrassing latest episode of Gary Neville's The Overlap. Now, Gary, for better for worse, is actually a very good interviewer. I think he's very, very good. He gets the best of the people. He's actually a very, you know, he gets in there and he's self-deprecating and so on. And of course, Gary's guy who came out and said, European Super League is bad. Yeah, you're working for Sky. You screwed over English football for a good pay packet. Of course, he interviewed Tyson Fury. Not a word about doping.
It was a
Spoke
very
with
good
Roy.
interview aside from that.
It was. I mean, the interview
Which
with
was
Roy
weird.
Keane, yeah, and the one with Roy Keane was absolutely sensational. This one with David Beckham. Now I watched it, and I mean, it was. How can you say it? It was just basically. It was horrible to watch. Now this, of course, he never asked a question about where the nearly $300 million dollars. Why was David Beckham, or why is he being paid that by the state of Qatar? Now again, I am not going to say it's bad that the World Cup's in Qatar. No, I'm not going to say golf is bad. It's going to be a set but no, it's not that I have any plus or minus. No one is clean. No one is clean in the world of sport. I will speak about that in just a couple of minutes here in regards to Tyson Fury. But this interview, it was basically, sorry, Isel, for your tender ears, but this was just like, I think Eamon Dunphy, the Irish pundit, said it very, very well when it was the first time you seen two men have sex on, TV, live on TV. This was the same. It was like, you're the best. No, you're the best. You're the best. And not a hard question asked.
It was the least hard-hitting interview I think that has ever been done. And the other thing we have to factor in here, yes, they're friends. Yes, they were former teammates. But if your job is to interview someone, you know what? You can ignore if you're going to be walking on a beach with, which is what he did with Tyson Fury, you're walking on a beach with a heavyweight boxer. In those circumstances, you may be less inclined when you're on your own with a cameraman and a man who is twice your size and weight to say to him, so let's discuss your links to this, that, and the other, or let's discuss your doping. When you're sitting in a room with David Beckham, like, he's also not the most difficult interviewee in the sense that this is a man who, if you ask him a tough question, he's probably not going to have the noise to avoid it. He's going to just basically go, oh, okay, and give you an answer. I think it's different if you're interviewing someone who's like a Lance Armstrong, who's a master at avoiding questions, who's extremely manipulative. This is David Beckham. Like, it was the time for him to potentially, not even a hard-hitting interview, but just to do an interview where you're in a position where you can ask this man questions because you're also his friend. There's nothing to prevent you other than your friendship, but there's nothing to prevent you saying, can you answer a question on this? And while the thing I do really like about Gary Neville's interviewing style is that he comes across like he's having a chat with a friend, or he's trying to get to know about something, maybe in the case with Fury, certainly a sport that wasn't his area. But when you're in a position, like, it'd be like me sitting down in a room with one of my best friends and deciding I wasn't going to ask a question that they will answer if you ask. And I think the interesting point is we're not saying sports are, like, most sports have connections to areas that are really, really worrying, and there's a lot of rights issues in the background. But you have to be able to ask the question if you're going to suggest a program is an interview. It's just not good enough. And I think at the best of times, David Beckham may not be the most stimulating of watches in terms of his being interviewed. But I think this was a real opportunity where Gary could have also, like, Gary's extremely vocal on other issues other than sport. If you follow him on Twitter, you'll see that he has a huge interest in politics, one that I think has probably always been there, but is becoming more and more evident from what he's tweeting, from what he's saying. There seems to be a social conscience there that he's displaying in what he's commenting on and his knowledge of his local area, etc. So how can you ignore the elephant in the room and not ask the question? Because surely a producer was saying, how about we ask David about this?
About Qatar, like, just a simple thing. And I mean, what was picked up on, now remember, this series, The Overlap, is brought to you in association with Sky Bet.
Yeah.
Gary, huge issues with betting addictions, gambling addictions in the UK. You're sponsored by Sky Bet. Come on. You know, The big things that the English media come up with was, oh, yes, that David Beckham said there was no such thing as cliques in the dressing room. We didn't care who you ate dinner with or who you were friends with. When you went out to play, if I saw Stevie G in a better position, I gave him the ball. That's what David said. The other was that David said that I think the three lions have a great chance. Well, he didn't say three lions. That was like paraphrased by the English media. A great chance in Qatar. Okay, and again, Gary, I think Gary's very good. He's very funny. He's very clever. He can do an awful lot more. But it's like, I don't know. It's like someone who, is standing there with a box of matches and a thing of petrol, and he's saying, "Look at those people. They're actually putting the house on fire." I'm like, yeah, but you're kind of going to do it as well. Oh, no, that's not me. It just baffles me, Issa. But Issa, should that even be given time in the media? Is this not just celebrity nonsense?
I think you could argue it's a bit of celebrity nonsense. There's a level of fascination that everyone has in getting to know celebrities, and getting to see someone like, there's a huge difference between seeing someone like Kay Burnley on Sky News. She's the first name that came into my head. Apologies. So there's a big difference between a news presenter interviewing someone and someone like Gary Neville, who knows them on a personal level. And I think that's why you get drawn in. And perhaps that's why you can criticize more roundly, because you see this and you're like, you two know each other. This should feel like we're watching you have a chat, but with the serious side. And I think that's the disappointment. I also think I don't think that every footballer, and we've discussed this at length with things like Black Lives Matter, with footballers coming out, I don't think every footballer, it's not their job to be a spokesperson on every issue. Not at all. When you are taking payment or when you are actively involved in something, then it is literally your job. Ergo, you should have to answer questions on that topic, and a journalist worth their salt, or someone who is interviewing you for that purpose, should ask you the questions, because while not everyone will want to know the answers, there are people out there who'd like to hear your position, even if you don't agree with it. And I think, as much as, let's say, we've talked a lot about the live golf situation and the Saudis, as much as I dislike Phil Mickelson quite intensely, he's the one getting raked over the coals, in the sense of all the questions are directed at him. And unfortunately, while he's avoiding the questions, some other Egypts in that pack, Graham McDowell, are answering them on his behalf. They're like, let me tell you why the Saudis are great. And you kind of go, okay, at least he's being asked the questions. Now he's deflecting. But fair play to journalists who will probably find they're pushed out of other rooms because, and as did happen last week, their access is limited because they're asking these questions. Fair play to them. And if he doesn't want to answer them, okay. But at least they're being asked.
Well, that's the whole thing. I mean, you can just ask a question. The person can answer if they want or not. Like we both said, like, many times asking people questions, the most difficult thing I've found. I've never had someone who refused to answer a question for me. But I've had moments where I can see a person just kind of like, not deer in the headlights moment, but they kind of went, oh, like Anishak Fatadze was one, when I asked her a question about like a terrible incident in her life and how did that affect her career, because it was all downhill from there. I was told after, I was criticized, I was hammered by journalists who covered the tennis beat. How can you do that? So that's amateur hour. I'm like, no, it's a logical thing. Like, oh, we don't want to ask her that. You don't want to
Your
ask her.
job as a journalist, yeah, it's to ask hard questions. You can
exactly.
also pepper them in with nice questions or other more topical things that might be easier for someone. But your job as a journalist is not to be there as a cheerleader, and that's the issue.
Look, I think it's worth. Sorry, so I think it's myself and Andy Max discussed this a few shows back. I think it's worse than like a cheerleader or a fanboy fangirl with a laptop, as or I think Paul Kimmich said it best, fanboy fangirls with typewriters. I think it's worse than that. I think, and I've seen this with so many sports journalists now, and there's one in particular that covers cycling on Eurosport, who puts herself forward as a journalist. And yet she goes into teams and gets paid by teams to do paid promotions with teams. You don't
you're their PR person. You're doing marketing. You are not a journalist. There is a difference.
But it's fine. I mean, good God. I mean, maybe it's because I've never been asked to do those things. I say, oh, that's no. But I've done things where we've organized them, like Andy Mack's part of them as well. We've organized it where we've been asking questions, forums and so on, and champ talks and so on. So that's different. We actually discussed really interesting deep topics. But when someone comes in and says you need to do this, I was like, no, no, no,
If your
no. The
script
only
is
like
written for you, it's not an interview.
exactly. I there's one where there was an award ceremony when there was like ex-Spanish players. It was basically global awards for football. I gave in my list of questions. I asked my questions on the night. I asked, like, this was live, broadcast live, and also with a very well-to-do audience were there, sports media from business. And I asked I just blanked his name right now, but he was the son, former Real and Malaga player, played for Spain as well, and his dad, Science, but I forget his first name. And I asked him, like, why is the English Premier League better than the La Liga? He went off for me. He was like, no, it's not. And he explained, and then I just sort of said, like, what do you say to people who say you only play professional football because your father owned the club? And he looked at me and he just started laughing. And he said, well, and he explained why. He said, you don't do this, this, this. He said, yeah, he said, I played there. My father knew I could do it. Fine. But again, I got hit by certain journalists, Spanish journalists, especially saying, you can't ask that, that's wrong. The guy played for the club that his father owned. He then went on to work within the club. What's the question with that? I'd ask him to say, but I mean, like if we look at the here we have our two good buddies here together. This is finishing off this segment.
Oh
This
God, I
is
feel so old.
yes. There's ones where they're topless. There's ones that are walking like out, having walking with their friends and so on. But this is them. Okay, so it's very hard to step back and to be objective. But unfortunately, when you're doing it for Sky, when you're being paid by Sky Bet and you're speaking with one of your best mates you've known since you were like, you didn't even have hair on parts of your body where you have hairs. I mean, it's a dead loss. And in fairness, David Beckham, I know he said about like as an interview, I think he's been brilliant. I remember him when he was being interviewed by Ali G and he's here at Posh Spice. He was there, and all he did was laugh. And he's very good natured, and he's very, very good. And
Yeah.
anyone I know who's dealt with him has said the same thing. Great time for him. As I said, I think who was it said that was an English comedian said that like a body like Adonis and a voice like Tinky Winky from the Teletubbies.